I think he was a gambler. I think he was somebody that would have gone to Las Vegas on a regular basis had it been built in the Victorian period, and I'm sure he would have been married to Elizabeth Taylor at least once had she been alive in the Victorian period.
Peter Herdic, who was born in Fort Plains, New York in 1824, lost his father before the age of 2.
He was a 7th son, if you put any stock in that. His mother had been widowed twice, they had moved twice, all his older brothers had gone to work at a very early age, and he was too little to do anything. And I think that feeling of powerlessness really drove him.
Herdic arrived in Lycoming County in 1846 with a business partner, William Andrus, and together they bought a shingle mill in Cogan House Township. He bought a 154-acre farm on Lycoming Creek in 1849, and in December of that year married Amanda Taylor. Herdic, who did not spend loosely, saved most of his earnings from the shingle mill for future investments. By the early 1850s, he decided that future was lumber.
He moved to Williamsport proper in 1853 and became involved in the emerging lumber industry. And especially in the key to the lumber industry was how to store the lumber so that it could be used year-round. Because you can cut the lumber and float it down the streams when the streams are high in the spring. But then what do you do for your mills when the streams are low?
The answer was a lumber boom, which is simply a large storage device on the river connected to a series of piers. The first such endeavor that Herdic was involved with, the Susquehanna boom, was immensely successful until it was carried downriver by the flood of 1860. Refusing to dwell on this disaster and learning from the inadequacies of the first design, Herdic and his partners quickly rebuilt the boom, only to face a much larger flood in 1865. This time, however, it survived.
And that is the boom then that provided Williamsport with the base of its lumber so that they could run mills year-round.
The boom also provided a steady cash flow, and this allowed Herdic to indulge his other interest, land development. When he first arrived in Williamsport, the city was made up of what is today known as the downtown area, bounded on the west by Hepburn Street. And it was Herdic's intention to build beyond that boundary, to create, in effect, a commonwealth beside the existing city. He began by building a home for his family, which at the time consisted of Amanda and their infant daughter, Florence. The house, located at 407 West 4th Street, was designed by Eber Culver, who soon became the architect of choice for the lumber industry's elite. By the 1860s, there were 18 millionaires in Williamsport, 17 of whom used Culver to design their houses, and nearly all of them were located on West 4th Street, an area that became known as Millionaires Row. Amanda Taylor Herdic died in December of 1856, not long after moving into her new home. 3 years later, Herdic married N.C. Maynard, the daughter of a prominent judge and a member of a wealthy family.
She was a very active religious person, an organist in the church. That tie with one of the older families in town sort of further cemented the relationships, because this man was into all kinds of businesses. He actually bought the Gazette and Bulletin, which is now the Sun Gazette, the newspaper, and owned it for a time. He owned sawmills. He owned a bank for a time, just all kinds of things. He was also into churches.
He gave money or land for 12 different churches, including the Jewish synagogue and the Roman Catholic Church. And I always think that's interesting because in an era of total belief in a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant deity, he did not go to church. His first wife was a Baptist, his second wife was Episcopalian. He sent the wife, he sent the kids, but he never went to church himself.
He is the most remarkable religious philanthropist in Williamsport, and maybe in any city in Pennsylvania.
Well, he gave the land and a lot of money for Trinity Episcopal Church to be built. I always tell the tourists the only church built by millionaires, for millionaires, with millionaire money, in the hopes that their sons and daughters would go to church there, meet and mingle and get married and hopefully keep all the money in the family. And apparently a lot of them did.
Herdic wanted a centerpiece for the Commonwealth he was creating and decided to build a grand railroad hotel. a project that met with much resistance, particularly from the Philadelphia and Erie Railroad.
He devised a plan to build this hotel on Campbell Street, a grand hotel by anybody's judgment. Today it's considered a grand place, and it's somewhat smaller than his original construction. At the same time, he negotiated with the Philadelphia and Erie Railroad to move its station. Now, the city fathers weren't happy with moving the station out of downtown, so in fact what Herdic got them to do was to open a second station. 2 stations a mile apart, one for his railroad hotel and the other for downtown business.
I think the interesting thing about it too is this construction was occurring during the Civil War, which to me I think is quite a gutsy move. This had 400 rooms, was able to handle 700 guests, and was a very expensive hotel for its time, costing around $225,000.
Unfortunately, the gas company did not have the lines or the power to get gas because this was in the day of gas illumination before electricity to the Herdic House Hotel. So he built his own plant on Campbell Street. So now the town fathers saw a man coming into town, not only building a hotel and moving the railroad station, but building a new gas plant for his own use. The hotel opened in September of 1865. The night before it opened, the gas plant, his gas plant, burned to the ground.
I know his staff scrambled throughout the city, scrambling for candles, kerosene lanterns in order to illuminate the building properly for its grand opening.
He also delved into the business of public transportation.
He designed a specific type of carriage called a Herdic, and it's in the dictionary under Herdic. I know that he designed the original trolley, a trolley system that ran from Market Square up to the Herdic House Hotel, so that once again he could shove, more business dollars and people to buy things up into the west end of town.
In the 1870s, as Millionaires Row began to develop, Herdic launched a separate, massive personal building campaign that many believe led to his financial ruin.
There was a panic in '73, so there was an economic condition. But he is credited with having built over 800 houses, most of them at a cost or calculated in such a way that his workers could afford to live in them. So the theory goes that he had extended himself in a time when lumber was strong and when the economy was strong, and when the economy went south, the implication is he did fairly little to protect himself.
Yet another project that Herdic pursued in the 1870s, only to have construction halted when he went bankrupt, was what would have been known as the Herdic Block.
4 floors of apartments, shops and offices, and the lumberman's bank on the first floor, and a penthouse on the top for himself. Ran out of money in the middle of the construction and was forced to sell it off to William Whiteman, the quinine king of Philadelphia. So it's not called the Herdic Block, but it should be.
Much of the last 10 years of Peter Herdic's life was devoted to his financial recovery. He traveled the country engaging in many different enterprises, most notably the development of what became known as the Herdic system of waterworks.
He was examining an earthenware dam, or a dam made out of dirt in Ohio, and he slipped and fell and gave himself a concussion. I think they brought him back here, and he lived for maybe 3 days in a coma and then passed away. And he was in his second bankruptcy at that time. He was so poor that he couldn't afford a headstone, and he's buried on the Maynard lot up in the local cemetery. About 20 years ago, I guess they took up a collection and bought him a headstone, since he was, if not the founder of the town, a big deal in the town. Le grand fromage, as we like to say. He did a lot for the city, a lot of public stuff that he didn't have to do. And none of the other millionaires, many of whom had a lot more money, did nearly as much for Williamsport as Peter Herdic did.
If people were to put together a list of some of the greatest personalities in baseball history, Carl would have to be there. Even if you put together a list of some of the people that had great impacts on sociology in America, that Carl would have to be there as well, because Little League's in every state. It's in more than 100 countries around the world. It's probably the most recognizable term in youth sports, and it's all because of Carl Stotz.
On display in a small museum at the birthplace of Little League Baseball are the remnants of a lilac bush that flourished 65 years ago in the backyard of a Williamsport home. This was where an architect and landscape designer named Carl Edwin Stotz regularly played catch with his two young nephews. And the lilac bush's contribution to Little League Baseball is now part of the legacy of that national institution.
Carl didn't have any sons of his own, so his nephews would come over and they called him Uncle Tuck, and they'd ask if he could come out and play, and he did. And they were playing catch one time, and a ball went astray, and he went to get the ball, and in the neighbor's half of their yard, there was a lilac bush that had been trimmed down, and he didn't realize it was there, and he stepped on it, and it scraped his ankle up pretty badly so that he was bleeding.
And he sat down on the back steps of his property with the boys, and he was rubbing his ankle, and he says, how would you like to play on a baseball team with uniforms, bats you can really swing, and a new ball for every game? I think we have to remember that there weren't bats of the size of kids at those days. There weren't gloves that really fit young boys at those days. So that was an exciting thing, and that is really what started it. He gathered the boys together, told them to get their neighborhood kids in the next ensuing weeks. This would have been in the fall of 1938. And he took them over to a playground and established the dimensions for Little League.
We were in Sunday school one day, and this fellow walks in and he said, would you fellas like to play in an organized baseball league? Well, of course, everybody sat there, and that was it. And of course, he said, well, there'll be a practice coming up, he says, starting the first of the week on Tuesday. Anybody would like to play, show up with their gloves.
In late 1938, the Pure Oil Company, for whom Stotz was working, closed their Williamsport plant, and he was suddenly unemployed. But even while he was seeking permanent employment in Williamsport, he tried to find sponsorship for his innovative youth baseball league. However, he was turned down by 56 prospective sponsors.
Now, he would tell me that he would go in and ask them for a job. And they'd say no, they didn't have any jobs for him. So then he'd ask them if they'd like to sponsor a boys' baseball team. But in 1938, fall, and then winter into 39, those were hard times in this country. But I think that it tells of his integrity that even his family does not know the 56 people who told him no. Now, those were local business people in Williamsport, and we don't know who they were.
Stotz finally landed a more permanent position as a bill collector at the Lundy Lumber Company, thus solidifying a relationship with the Lundy family that would prove beneficial for Little League Baseball in the years to come. The Lundy Lumber Company, along with Lycoming Dairy and Jumbo Pretzel, would become the sponsors for the first Little League season in 1939.
Well, it was a great opportunity, it really was, because that was something new, and the thing that you have somebody furnish the equipment, the suits, and the balls and the bats, and had to get our own gloves. But if somebody didn't have a glove, Carl would go out, he'd get a glove for them.
The first Little League game between Lundy Lumber and Carl Stotz Lycoming Dairy took place on a church league field in Park Point in Williamsport. Lundy Lumber won easily, 23-8.
They really walloped us. But the good part about it was that we got a little more organized. We came back and we won the league championship.
The game actually made the newspaper. The Williamsport Sun ran a story about it, just as they might have for a big league ball game. Nobody knew where it was going to go then.
By this time, he is employed, but records show that he spent $40 of his monthly salary of $80 to buy equipment for the Little League.
You had the very end of the Depression happening. There was a lot of money to go around for basically recreation for kids. Eventually he did find it though, and he got some friends to help out. Just when things were starting to spread a little bit in Williamsport, you had the war coming. It really kept the growth of Little League down, mostly in the Williamsport area. It did spread a little bit as the war years went on, but not not like it might have, but that gave Carl a chance to sort of tweak things, to make it better as it went on, so that by the time the war ended and you had all these dads coming home from war, in many cases not having seen their kids for years, it gave them a way to get reacquainted. Society itself changed then too, because there was a lot more leisure time for families then. Families were doing more things together at the end of the day, and Little League gave them something to do.
There were only a dozen Little League programs in place during the World War II years, all of them in Pennsylvania. But during the first year of the national tournament in 1947, a league was formed outside the Keystone State.
There were 17 leagues in existence at the time, and they were all invited to Williamsport for the first national tournament. The success of that first year series started bringing in more media, and you had a Saturday Evening Post writer that was here for the 1948 World Series. And he wrote a great story, a multiple-page story, and they had photos and everything. And at the time, the Saturday Evening Post was read by millions of people around the country. And that, in turn, was seen by a filmmaker, Emerson York, who came out and did a movie trailer on Little League Baseball and what it was all about. And that was seen by millions of people.
Kelly's really in the hole. 2 runs in. Ralph Patton up. The pitch, and Patton labels it a 2-miler. 1 mile up in the air, and another mile over the right center field fence. Another round tripper for the visiting Floridians, and still only 2 outs. As he jogs around the circuit, this hard-hitting left fielder reminds us of Ruth in his youth.
Those 2 events, the Emerson York trailers and the Saturday Evening Post article, really made Little League explode onto people's consciousnesses around the country.
By 1948, there were 77 leagues in the United States. U.S. Rubber became the first corporate sponsor for Little League Baseball, and media coverage continued to intensify. Stotz was tireless when it came to spreading the gospel of Little League, and he traveled around and even beyond the country, often with his wife and 2 daughters in tow.
He would really enthuse them, and they would go back into their own little communities and then start it. He was like the Johnny Appleseed, I guess.
He was like a father to all of us. And a lot of us, there wasn't television in those days, and that's how we spent most of our time, playing baseball. And so when this thing came along in an organized league, it was a great opportunity for us.
I would venture to say that Little League actually changed the way American families exist today, because prior to Little League, the family was oriented around the man. When he came home from work, if it was the factory or wherever, we got supper and we did what suited the man's schedule. And after Little League became quite the phenomenon that it did become, our families revolved around our children.
We can't do too much for our boys. They're only young once.